I didn't just walk up to my front door. I ran to it. After 730 days in a hole in the Middle East, the only thing keeping me sane was the image of my front porch. I could feel the weight of my daughter, Violet, jumping into my arms. I could smell my wife's vanilla perfume. But when I slid my key into the lock of the home I paid for with blood and sweat, it didn't turn. Hit like, subscribe for more betrayal stories, and comment your city or country. The metal jammed. I pulled it out, checked the teeth, and tried again. Nothing. I took a step back and looked at the handle. It was brand new, shinier than the one I left behind. The deadbolt was different too. My heart didn't race. It stopped. In my line of work, Delta Force, you learn that when the landscape changes without intel, you are walking into an ambush. I dropped my duffel bag on the concrete. The sound was loud in the quiet suburban afternoon. I knocked. 3 hard raps. I heard footsteps. They were light, hesitant. Who is it? The voice was muffled, but I knew it. It was Tessa, my wife. But she sounded wrong. Her voice usually had a melody to it, a lightness. This sounded like a woman speaking with a gun to her head. "It's Mason," I said, my voice cracking just a little. "Tess, it's me. Open the door." There was a long silence. Then, the sound of a chain sliding, followed by the click of the lock. The door opened a crack. Tessa's face appeared in the gap. She looked terrible. She had lost 20 pounds. Her cheekbones were sharp, her eyes sunken and rimmed with red. She was wearing a sweater, pulled tight around her body, even though it was humid and hot outside. "Mason," she whispered. She didn't open the door wider. She used her body to block the view inside. "I'm home," I said, reaching out to touch her face. I made it back. She flinched. She actually pulled back from my hand like I was going to strike her. That reaction hit me harder than any bullet I'd ever taken. You were supposed to be dead," she stammered. "The army, they sent a letter. Missing in action. I'm here now," I said, pushing gently on the door. "Let me in, Tess." "Where's Violet? Is she at school?" Tessa's eyes darted to the side. No, she's not here." "Mason, you can't come in." Before I could process what she said, the door was ripped from her grip and swung wide open. A man stood there. He was taller than me, broader in the waist, with a face that looked too smooth. He was wearing a robe. My robe. The navy blue silk one Tessa had bought me for our 5th anniversary. He was barefoot, holding a glass of iced tea, looking at me like I was a solicitor trying to sell him solar panels. "Can we help you, buddy?" he asked. His voice was deep, confident, and dripping with arrogance. I looked at Tessa, then at him. "Who is this?" "I'm Evan," he said, stepping forward, placing a heavy hand on Tessa's shoulder. I saw his fingers dig into her collarbone. She went rigid. "I'm Tessa's fiancé, and the owner of this house." "Fiancé?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I've been gone 2 years. I'm not dead. I'm not divorced. This is my house, and that is my wife." Evan took a sip of his tea, unbothered. "Legally, you were declared dead 6 months ago, soldier." Tessa moved on. "We needed someone to take care of things. You know how it is. Nature abhors a vacuum." My hands curled into fists at my sides. I wanted to smash his teeth down his throat. But my training took over. Assess. Analyze. Act. If I beat him to a pulp right now, on the front porch in broad daylight, the police would come. I'd be the violent ex-husband returning from war with PTSD. I'd go to jail, and I'd lose access to everything. "Where is my daughter?" I asked. My voice dropped to a register that usually made grown men wet themselves. "Where is Violet?" Evan's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Violet is away." "Away where?" "Boarding school," Evan said quickly. "A place for troubled youth. Up north." "Trouble." I stepped onto the porch. "Violet is 7 years old. She paints watercolors and rescues worms from the sidewalk. She isn't troubled. She changed after you died," Evan said, stepping in front of Tessa, blocking her completely. "She became violent. Unmanageable. She started hurting herself. We had to send her away for her own good. She's in a facility. No visitors allowed for the first 90 days. Probationary period. Lies. I could smell the lie on him like cheap cologne. Violet wouldn't hurt a fly. And Tessa was staring at the floor, trembling. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at Evan's feet, terrified. I want the name of the school, I demanded. Get off my property, Evan said, his voice hardening. Or I call the cops. I have a gun in the kitchen, and under the castle doctrine, if you try to force your way in, I'll put a hole in you. Tessa doesn't want you here. Do you, honey? He squeezed her shoulder again. Hard. Go. Tessa whispered, a tear finally escaping her eye. Please, Mason. Just go. It's over. She didn't mean the marriage. I knew my wife. She was sending me a message. Go, before he hurts you too. I looked at Evan. I memorized the shape of his jaw, the vein in his neck. I'll go, I said, but I'll be back. I grabbed my bag and walked down the driveway. I didn't look back until I reached the street. When I did, the door was already closed. The deadbolt clicked into place. But I didn't leave the neighborhood. I walked 3 streets over, circled through the wooded area that bordered our subdivision, and came up behind the house. I moved through the brush, silent as a ghost. I had stalked insurgents in the mountains of Afghanistan. Sneaking into my own backyard was child's play. The sun was setting. The house was casting long shadows. I crept up to the edge of the patio. I needed to see inside. I needed to know if Tessa was okay. I moved along the siding, staying low, until I reached the back of the house. That's when I stopped. The basement window. It was a small, rectangular window at ground level. Violet used to sit down there and play with her dolls because it was cool in the summer. The window was gone. Someone had nailed a thick sheet of plywood over it from the outside. It wasn't just covered, it was sealed. And around the edges of the plywood, I saw fresh, expanding foam, the yellow kind used for insulation. They weren't trying to keep the cold out. They were trying to keep sound in. I pressed my ear against the plywood. The house was silent. But then, I heard a vibration. Not a voice. A thud. Thump. Thump. It was rhythmic. Weak. Like someone hitting a wall with a soft fist. Evan said Violet was at a boarding school up north. He said she was violent. He said she was gone. But as I knelt there in the dirt of my own backyard, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. My daughter wasn't at school. She was right on the other side of this wall. I pressed my ear harder against the rough plywood, ignoring the splinter biting into my cheek. The thumping had stopped, replaced by a silence that was heavier than the humid night air. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a chaotic rhythm that I forced to slow down. Panic is noise, and noise gets you killed. I needed to be sure. A muffled thump could be anything: a washing machine, a pipe, a settling foundation. But a father's gut instinct is rarely wrong, and mine was screaming that my daughter was inches away from me, separated only by concrete and wood. I couldn't rip the plywood off. The noise would alert Evan, and if he really had a gun, I couldn't risk him turning it on whoever was down there. I needed a better vantage point. I needed to hear clearly. I low-crawled away from the window, moving through the overgrown grass toward the side of the house. The garage. The garage shared a common wall with the basement utility room. If Violet was down there, that was the thinnest barrier between us. The side door to the garage was locked. A standard keypad lock. I didn't have the code anymore, but I didn't need it. I pulled a thin tension wrench from my pocket. Old habits die hard, and slid it into the keyway. 2 seconds later, the tumblers clicked. I slipped inside and closed the door softly behind me. The garage smelled of gasoline and stale beer. My tools were gone. My workbench was covered in boxes marked Tessa's junk. I navigated the clutter in the dark, moving toward the far wall. I pressed my ear against the drywall, closing my eyes, tuning out the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen above, tuning out the distant traffic. I listened. At first, nothing. Then, a scrape, like metal dragging on concrete. And then, a voice. It was so faint, so broken, it sounded like a ghost. Mommy, please. It was Violet. My knees almost buckled. The sound of her voice, weak and trembling, tore through me like shrapnel. She wasn't at a boarding school. She wasn't troubled. She was trapped in the dark, begging for her mother. Please, water. I bit down on my own hand to keep from screaming. The rage that flooded my veins was molten. I wanted to punch through the drywall, tear the studs apart, and pull her out. But I was a Delta operator. I knew that rushing in without intel was a suicide mission. I needed to know what I was walking into. I needed to know where the hostiles were. I moved back to the door, slipping out into the night. I circled to the back patio again. The kitchen window was elevated, but there was a stack of crates against the wall that hadn't been there 2 years ago. I climbed up, careful not to make a sound, and peered through the edge of the blinds. The kitchen was bright. Too bright. Evan was there. He was sitting at the kitchen table, reading a newspaper. He looked relaxed, the picture of domestic calm. But on the table, sitting right next to his coffee mug, was a pistol. It wasn't just any pistol. It was my Sig Sauer P226, the personal sidearm I kept in the safe upstairs. He had unlocked my safe. He had taken my weapon, and it was cocked, the hammer back, ready to fire. He wasn't guarding the house from intruders. He was guarding the basement door. Then, the basement door opened. Tessa walked into the kitchen. The sight of her made my blood run cold. She was holding a plastic bowl and a rag. Her hands were shaking so badly the bowl rattled against her hip. She walked to the sink and turned on the water. She began to scrub the rag. The water running into the drain turned pink. Blood. She wasn't just washing a dish. She was cleaning up evidence. She was washing my daughter's blood off a rag. Evan didn't look up from his paper. Did she eat it? He asked. Tessa shook her head, tears streaming down her face, mixing with the water in the sink. She threw it up. Evan. She's burning up. She needs a doctor. Please. It's been 8 days. 8 days. She doesn't need a doctor, Evan said, turning a page. She needs to learn respect. She needs to learn that when I tell her to be quiet, she stays quiet. If you go soft on her now, Tessa, all of this is for nothing. Do you want to lose the house? Do you want to go to jail? Tessa sobbed, a choked, pathetic sound. I can't do this anymore. You'll do it until I say stop, Evan said. His voice didn't rise. It was flat, monotone, and terrifying. He reached out and tapped the barrel of the gun on the table. Clack, clack. Or maybe you want to join her down there? Tessa froze. She turned off the water, squeezed the rag dry, and hung it over the faucet. She looked defeated, a shell of the woman I had married. She walked out of the room, heading upstairs. I dropped down from the window. My boots hit the grass silently. I had all the intel I needed. My daughter had been tortured for 8 days. My wife was a hostage in her own mind, complicit through fear. And a psychopath was sitting 20 feet away with my gun, waiting for an excuse to use it. I reached into my boot and pulled out my knife. It was a fixed blade, 6 inches of carbon steel. It wasn't a gun, but in close quarters, it was deadlier. I wasn't going to call the police. The police would knock. They would announce themselves. Evan would have time to put a bullet in Violet or force Tessa to lie. No, this wasn't a police matter anymore. This was a rescue operation. I walked to the back door. It was a sliding glass door. I knew the lock mechanism was weak. I had meant to replace it years ago. I thank God I never got around to it. I placed my palms flat against the glass, took a deep breath, and prepared to cross the threshold. The man inside thought he was the predator. He thought he was the one in control because he had the gun and the girl. He had no idea that the monster he was afraid of was already standing on his porch. I slid the knife into a reverse grip. It was time to go to work. The sliding glass door didn't make a sound. I had lubricated the track myself 3 years ago with graphite, and it still held true. I slipped into the kitchen, the cool air conditioning hitting my sweat-drenched face. Evan was still reading the paper. He took a sip of his coffee. He was facing away from me, the gun sitting near his right hand on the table. He was confident. Too confident. I didn't rush. Rushing makes noise. I moved across the tile floor in my socks. I had slipped my boots off on the patio, rolling my weight from heel to toe. 5 steps. 4 steps. He must have felt the air shift, or maybe he saw my reflection in the dark window. He started to turn, his hand reaching for the Sig Sauer. Hey, he never finished the word. I was on him. I didn't stab him. I needed him alive for answers, and I needed him quiet. I slammed his face into the heavy oak table. Crunch. The sound of cartilage breaking was sickeningly loud. The gun skittered across the table and fell to the floor. Evan groaned, his hands flying to his nose, blood gushing through his fingers. I didn't give him a second to recover. I grabbed him by the back of his hair and slammed him down again. He went limp, slumping out of the chair onto the floor. I kicked the gun under the refrigerator. Threat neutralized. I turned to the basement door. It was right there, a simple white door I had painted myself. But now, it had a heavy-duty padlock hasp screwed into the frame. A master lock secured it. I didn't have the key, and I didn't have time to pick it. I ran to the garage door, grabbed a crowbar from my old toolbox. Thank God Tessa hadn't thrown everything away, and sprinted back. I jammed the claw of the bar behind the hasp and heaved with everything I had. Wood splintered. The screws groaned and then popped out like bullets. The door swung open. The smell hit me instantly. It wasn't just the smell of a damp basement. It was the sharp, chemical sting of bleach mixed with the copper tang of old blood and the sour stench of human waste. It was the smell of a cage. I switched on the light. The bulb at the bottom of the stairs flickered and buzzed. Violet, I called out, rushing down the wooden steps. The basement was a wreck. Boxes were overturned. But in the center of the room, near the furnace, they had cleared a space. My knees hit the concrete before my brain could fully process what I was seeing. Violet was curled into a ball on a thin, filthy mattress. She was wearing a t-shirt that was 3 sizes too big and stained yellow. Her legs. God, her legs. Her right ankle was shackled. A heavy iron chain ran from her ankle to the main gas pipe of the furnace. The skin around the metal cuff was raw, rubbed down to the meat. Violet. I choked out, crawling toward her. She flinched violently, scrambling backward until her back hit the furnace. She covered her face with her hands. No, I'll be quiet. I promise I'll be quiet, she screamed, her voice raspy and broken. It's me, I said, tears blurring my vision. It's Daddy. Look at me, baby. It's Daddy. She peeked through her fingers. Her eyes were huge, dark circles bruising the skin beneath them. She stared at me for a long, agonizing second. Recognition fought through the terror. Daddy, she whispered. I'm here, I said, reaching for the chain. I'm right here. I grabbed the chain and pulled. It was solid steel. I couldn't break it. I needed the key. Where is it? I growled to myself. I looked at Violet. Where is the key, honey? She pointed a trembling finger up the stairs. He wears it around his neck. Evan. I stood up, ready to sprint back upstairs and tear that key off his unconscious body. But before I could take a step, a shadow fell across the top of the stairs. Evan was standing there. His face was a mask of blood. His nose was smashed sideways, his lips swollen. But he wasn't unconscious. He was leaning against the doorframe, swaying slightly. And he was smiling. It was a grotesque, bloody grin that exposed red-stained teeth. In his hand, he held his phone. The screen was glowing. Go ahead, he slurred, waving the phone at me. Take her. Break the chain. Be the hero. I took a step toward the stairs, my fists clenched. Give me the key. He reached into his robe, pulled out a small silver key on a chain, and dangled it. Then, he tossed it down the stairs. It clattered on the concrete, sliding to a stop at my feet. You're going to need that, he said, wiping blood from his chin. Because the police are about 3 minutes away. I already called them. Told them a deranged intruder, my wife's dead ex-husband, broke in and assaulted me. And when they get here, well, look at the scene, Mason. He gestured to the room, to the chains, to the bleach. It looks like you've been busy down here, he said softly, keeping her all to yourself. I looked at the key. I looked at Violet, shivering on the mattress. I realized then that the physical war was over. The psychological war had just begun. I didn't waste a second on him. His words were poison, designed to make me freeze, but I moved faster. I snatched the key from the concrete floor. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of pure, unadulterated hatred. I knelt beside Violet. "It's okay, baby. It's almost over." The key turned with a soft click. The shackles fell open. Violet didn't move at first. She stared at her raw ankle, as if she couldn't believe she was free. Then, she launched herself at me. Her small arms wrapped around my neck, and she buried her face in my chest, sobbing so hard her whole body shook. She smelled of sweat and fear, but underneath it all, she still smelled like my little girl. "I got you," I whispered into her hair. "I got you." I scooped her up. She felt impossibly light. Too light. She was 7 years old, but she felt like she weighed nothing. I turned to the stairs. Evan was gone from the doorway. I carried her up, my boots heavy on the wooden steps. When I reached the kitchen, the room was empty. The back door was open. I could hear sirens in the distance, wailing, getting louder. Evan hadn't lied about calling them. I walked into the living room. Tessa was sitting on the couch, her face buried in her hands. Evan was standing by the front window, peering through the blinds. He had used a towel to wipe some of the blood off his face, but his nose was still a ruin. He turned when he saw me. He didn't look scared. He looked expectant. "Put her down, Mason," he said calmly. "Get out of my way," I warned, shifting Violet's weight so my right hand was free. "You can't take her," Evan said. "She's a minor. I'm her legal guardian. You are a legally dead man who just committed breaking and entering and assault." Blue lights flashed against the living room walls, strobing through the window. The sirens cut abruptly, replaced by the slam of car doors. "Police, open up." Evan looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the true depth of his evil. He wasn't just cruel. He was a master manipulator. He dropped to his knees, threw the towel on the floor, and put his hands up in a gesture of surrender, facing the door. "Help! He's got a knife. He's got my daughter." Evan screamed, his voice pitching up into a terrified falsetto. The front door burst open. 3 officers swarmed in, guns drawn. One of them, a thick-necked sergeant I didn't recognize, spotted me instantly. I was standing there, blood on my shirt, Evan's blood, holding a crying child, with a tactical knife still sheathed on my belt. "Drop the child. Hands in the air." "Do it now," the sergeant roared. "She's injured," I shouted back. "She needs a medic. Look at her legs." I said, "Drop the child." Violet screamed as I slowly lowered her to the carpet. She clung to my leg. "No, Daddy, don't let go. Get away from her." The sergeant rushed me. He didn't ask questions. He didn't look at the chain marks on Violet's ankles. He saw a big, scary man and a victim bleeding on the floor. They slammed me against the wall. The impact knocked the wind out of me. Handcuffs bit into my wrists. He broke in. Evan sobbed from the floor, pointing a shaking finger at me. "He's crazy. He's my wife's ex. He thinks he's still in the war. He beat me. He was trying to take Violet." "Check the basement," I yelled, struggling against the cuffs. "Check the damn basement." He had her chained up. One of the younger officers, a rookie, looked at Evan, then at me. "Check it," the sergeant barked. The rookie ran to the kitchen. He came back 30 seconds later. He looked pale. "Sarge," he said, his voice trembling. There's chains down there. A mattress. It smells like." The sergeant's eyes narrowed. He looked at Evan. Evan didn't flinch. "It's her safe room," he said quickly, his voice dropping to a tragic whisper. "Violet. She has severe behavioral episodes. She hurts herself. The doctors said we needed to restrain her during her fits so she wouldn't break her own bones. We were trying to protect her." "That's a lie," I warned. "Look at her. She's starved. She refuses to eat during her episodes," Evan countered smoothly. "Ask her mother. Tessa, tell them." Every eye in the room turned to Tessa. She was still on the couch. She looked at me, handcuffed and bleeding. She looked at Evan, who was staring at her with cold, dead eyes. "Tessa," I pleaded, "tell the truth." Tessa's lip quivered. She looked at Violet, who was curled on the floor, weeping. Tessa's voice broke. She has episodes. Evan. Evan was just trying to help. My heart shattered. It didn't break. It turned to dust. She had chosen him. Fear had chosen for her. The sergeant looked back at me. The sympathy was gone. Now, I was just the intruder who didn't understand his daughter's medical condition. Get him out of here, the sergeant said. They dragged me toward the door. As I passed Evan, he leaned in. The officers couldn't hear him over Violet's screaming, but I heard him. He whispered, low and wet with blood, "She barely lasted a week, Mason. I bet I can break her completely in two." I lunged at him, screaming, but the officers shoved me out into the cool night air and slammed me onto the hood of the cruiser. I watched through the back window as the paramedics arrived. They didn't take Violet to me. They took her to Tessa. And standing right behind Tessa, wiping his bloody nose and looking like a concerned father, was Evan. He had won the battle, but he had just started a war he couldn't possibly understand. The inside of a county jail cell smells the same everywhere. Sweat, disinfectant, and hopelessness. I sat on the metal cot, staring at the concrete wall, replaying the last hour in my head. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Violet's face as they dragged me away. I heard her scream, "Daddy!" I checked the time on the wall clock. It had been 6 hours. "Mason!" I looked up. Standing on the other side of the bars was a man in a sharp gray suit. Julian. He was my old JAG officer from my first tour, now a high-priced defense attorney in the private sector. I had used my one phone call to wake him up at 3 a.m. "You look like hell," Julian said, signaling the guard to open the cell. "Get me out, Julian," I said, standing up. "I need to get back there." "We posted bail," Julian said, his voice serious. "But we have a problem. A big one." He handed me a piece of paper through the bars before the door even opened. It was a temporary restraining order. Petitioner, Evan Davis. Protected parties, Tessa Davis, Violet Davis. Distance, 500 yards. The judge signed it an hour ago, Julian explained as we walked out into the fluorescent-lit hallway. Evan played the violent ex-husband with PTSD card perfectly. He has medical records for Violet claiming she's self-harming and psychotic. He has photos of his broken nose. And he has your wife's statement corroborating everything. "It's all lies," I growled, signing my release papers at the desk. "He chained her to a furnace, Julian. He starved her." "I believe you," Julian said, walking me out the front doors into the blinding morning sun. "But the law works on evidence, not belief. And right now, the evidence says you're the aggressor. If you go within 5 football fields of that house or that hospital, you go back inside for a year. And Violet stays with him." I stopped on the sidewalk. I felt helpless. For the first time in my life, I couldn't shoot, fight, or strategize my way out of the problem. The system was designed to protect people like Evan because they knew how to manipulate the paperwork. "So what do?" I asked. "Just let him kill her." "No," Julian said. He handed me a file folder. "You do what you do best. You gather intel. I had my PI run a deep background check on Evan Davis while you were being processed." I opened the folder. "Evan Davis is a ghost," Julian said. "He changed his name 4 years ago. Before that, he was Colin Miller. And before that, he was something else in Florida." I scanned the document. Subject, Colin Miller. Spouse, deceased, suicide. Stepchild, deceased, accidental drowning. My blood ran cold. "He's done this before," I whispered. "Look at the insurance payouts." Julian pointed to the bottom of the page. "Life insurance payout, $1.5 million. "He's a fixer," Julian said grimly. "He targets vulnerable single mothers. He marries them. He takes out policies on the kids. And then, accidents happen." I flipped to the next page. A recent credit report for Evan Davis. New policy issued 30 days ago. Insured, Violet Davis. Beneficiary, Evan Davis. Amount, $2 million. "He wasn't disciplining her," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "He was prepping her. He was breaking her down so her death would look like what? Suicide? An accident during an episode?" "He has a timeline," Julian said. If he just took out the policy, he has to wait a certain period before he can claim it without raising flags. Usually 90 days. 90 days, I repeated. But he's escalating. He tortured her for 8 days. He's enjoying it. The restraining order buys him time, Julian warned. He knows you can't touch him legally. He's going to wait for the heat to die down. Once you're out of the picture, buried in court dates. He'll kill her. I finished the sentence. I looked at the courthouse behind me. The blind lady holding the scales. She couldn't see Evan. She couldn't see the monster hiding behind the suit and the smile. I closed the folder. Thanks, Julian, I said. You did your job. Mason, Julian grabbed my arm. Don't do anything stupid. If you violate that order, I can't help you. I looked him in the eye. I won't violate the order, Julian. I'm not going to go near the house. I walked away toward the parking lot. Julian was right. I couldn't go near the house. But I wasn't going to the house. I needed to find the weak link in Evan's armor. And I knew exactly who that was. Tessa. She wasn't just a victim. She was the key. She had lied to the police. She had washed the blood. Why? Fear wasn't enough to make a mother watch her child starve. There was something else. Leverage. I needed to ask her myself. Not as her husband. Not as a soldier. As a ghost. I couldn't go to the house, but I knew Tessa's routine. Or at least, the routine she used to have. Every Tuesday at 10 a.m., she went to the specific grocery store on 5th Street because they had the freshest produce. It was a habit from when we were happy, from when she cooked Sunday dinners. I sat in a rented sedan in the far corner of the parking lot, watching the automatic doors. It was a long shot. Maybe Evan didn't let her shop anymore. Maybe she was too broken to leave the house. But at 10:15, a familiar silver SUV pulled in. Tessa got out. She was wearing sunglasses, big ones that covered half her face. She looked over her shoulder constantly, nervously checking her surroundings. She didn't look like a shopper. She looked like a fugitive. I waited until she was deep in the aisles. I put on a baseball cap and followed her inside. I found her in the cereal aisle. She was staring blankly at a box of sugary loops, her hand trembling as she reached for it. Tessa, I said softly. She spun around, dropping the box. Crash. Don't scream. I hissed, stepping close, boxing her in against the shelves. If you scream, I go to jail, and Violet dies. You know that. Mason, she gasped, her chest heaving. You can't be here. The order. Screw the order, I said. Why, Tessa? Why did you lie? Why did you let him chain our daughter to a furnace? I was scared. She stammered, tears leaking from under her glasses. He threatened me. Bullshit, I snapped. You're scared of him, yes. But you washed the blood off that rag, Tessa. You stood there and told the cops she was crazy. That's not just fear. That's complicity. What does he have on you? She looked down, biting her lip so hard it bled. Nothing. Please, Mason, leave us alone. I saw the insurance policy, I said. $2 million on Violet's life. Tessa flinched like I had slapped her. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging in. He promised he wouldn't hurt her. He said it was just insurance. For college. For college. I laughed, a cruel, harsh sound. He's a killer, Tessa. He did this in Florida. He killed a kid there. And you're helping him do it here. I didn't know about Florida, she cried, her voice rising. People turned to look. I dragged her toward the back of the store, near the loading docks. What does he have on you? I demanded, pinning her against the wall. Tell me the truth, or so help me God, I will burn his world down with you inside it. Tessa slid down the wall, collapsing into a heap on the dirty floor. She took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were swollen shut from crying. Money, she whispered. What? I owe people, she sobbed. While you were gone. I fell apart, Mason. I started gambling. Online poker. Then casinos. I lost the savings. I lost the college fund. I borrowed money from bad people. Sharks. They were going to kill me. They were going to hurt Violet. I stared at her, horrified. Evan. He paid them off, she confessed, the words spilling out like vomit. He paid my debt. Almost $100,000. But he made me sign a contract. He made me sign over the house. And, and he made me agree to the insurance policy on Violet as collateral for the loan. The room spun. You sold her, I whispered. You sold our daughter to pay a gambling debt. I thought I could pay him back, she wailed. I thought I could win it back. But then he moved in. He changed. He started teaching her lessons. And he told me if I tried to leave, he'd show the loan sharks where we were. Or he'd show the police the fraud I committed to get the loans. I'm trapped, Mason. I'm trapped. She reached for my hand. Help me, please. I looked at her hand. The hand I had put a ring on 10 years ago. I slapped it away. I'm not here to help you, I said, my voice cold as ice. You made your choice. You chose money over your own blood. I stepped back, looking at her with nothing but disgust. You're not a victim, Tessa. You're an accomplice. I turned my back on her. Where are you going? She screamed after me. I'm done playing by the rules, I said without looking back. I'm not saving my family anymore. I'm extracting the hostage. I walked out of the store. The sadness was gone. The grief was gone. All that was left was the mission. Tessa was compromised. The police were compromised. The law was compromised. It was just me and Violet now. And Evan was in the way. I didn't go back to the hotel. I went to a storage locker on the outskirts of town, one I had rented under a fake name 2 days ago. Inside, I had a kit. Not a military kit, but something close. Zip ties, duct tape, a burner phone, and a pry bar. I didn't have a gun anymore, but a weapon is just a tool. The real weapon is the mind, and mine was finally clear. I checked the GPS tracker I had slipped into the bumper of Evan's SUV while Tessa was crying in the grocery store. It was a cheap little device, meant for tracking cheating spouses, but it worked. The dot on my phone was moving. It was leaving the house. It was heading toward the hospital. Violet. Today was the discharge day. I knew it because Julian had warned me. Evan had successfully argued that Violet could be cared for at home under his supervision. The system was handing her back to the butcher. I watched the dot move along Route 9. It was a winding, two-lane road that cut through the state park. Isolated. Quiet. Perfect. I got into my rental car and drove. I didn't drive like a civilian. I drove like I was back in the Humvee, pushing the engine to its limit, cutting corners, calculating the intercept point. I saw them 10 minutes later. The silver SUV was cruising at a leisurely pace. Evan was driving. Tessa was in the passenger seat. And in the back, I saw a small head leaning against the window. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I didn't ram them. That's Hollywood stuff. Ramming risks the passengers. I needed to stop the car without hurting Violet. I floored it, overtaking them on a straight stretch. As I passed, I looked right at Evan. He saw me. His eyes went wide. He swerved slightly, startled. I pulled in front of him and slammed on the brakes. He didn't have a choice. He stomped on the pedal. Tires screeched, smoke billowing as the SUV fishtailed. He veered right to avoid hitting my bumper and plowed into the soft, muddy ditch on the side of the road. The SUV tilted dangerously but didn't roll. It came to a stop with a sickening crunch of plastic and metal. I was out of my car before my engine died. I had the pry bar in my hand. I ran to the back door of the SUV. Locked. I smashed the window with the bar. Crash. Glass rained down on the seat, but Violet was on the far side, shielded. Daddy, she screamed, covering her ears. Unlock the door. I shouted at Tessa in the front seat. Tessa was dazed, airbag deployed in her face. She fumbled with the lock button. Click. I ripped the door open. I unbuckled Violet and pulled her out. She was shaking, terrified, but unharmed. Run, I told her, pointing to the woods line. Run to the big oak tree and wait for me. Go. She ran. She limped slightly on her bad ankle, but she ran. I turned back to the car. Evan was struggling to get out of the driver's side. His door was jammed against the mud. He was kicking at the window, screaming obscenities. You're dead. Mason, he roared, his face twisted in fury. You're a dead man. Kidnapping. Attempted murder. I walked around to his side. The window was cracked. I smashed it the rest of the way in. He tried to reach for something in the glove box. My gun. I didn't let him. I jabbed the pry bar into the car, not to hit him, but to pin his arm against the dashboard. He howled in pain. Listen to me, I said, leaning in close, my voice barely a whisper over the hissing radiator. You have exactly 10 seconds to decide your future. You can chase me. You can call the cops. Or you can start running. I'll kill you, he spat. No, I said calmly. You won't. Because now I have what matters. And you have nothing. I pulled the bar back. If you come after us, Evan, bring a shovel. Because one of us isn't leaving the woods. I turned and sprinted toward the tree line. I scooped Violet up into my arms and ran. We disappeared into the dense forest before Evan could even climb out of the wreckage. We moved fast. I didn't stop until we were 2 miles deep, crossing a creek to throw off any dogs they might bring. Violet clung to me, her face buried in my neck. Are we going home? She asked quietly. I stopped and looked at her. Her face was dirty, her eyes haunted. But she was safe. No, baby, I said. We're not going home. That place isn't home anymore. I checked my phone. No signal. Good. They couldn't track us either. But I knew this wasn't over. Evan wouldn't just call the cops. A man like him, with money on the line and an ego the size of a mountain, wouldn't let this slide. He would hunt us. And I was counting on it. I wasn't running away. I was leading him into a trap. I took Violet to the only place I knew was safe, Ryder's cabin. Ryder was my old spotter from the teams. He lived off the grid, 40 miles north, in a place that didn't show up on Google Maps. She stays here, I told Ryder, standing on his porch as the sun went down. You watch her. If anyone comes up that driveway that isn't me, you drop them. Ryder didn't ask questions. He just looked at Violet, then at me, and nodded. He handed me a set of keys to his old truck and a black duffel bag. Inside was a night vision monocular and a suppressed .22 pistol. Not a war weapon, but quiet. Be careful, brother, Ryder said. You look like you're crossing a line. The line moved, I said. I drove back to the city. It was midnight by the time I parked Ryder's truck 3 blocks away from my old house. The neighborhood was quiet. The streetlights buzzed. I walked to the house. The SUV wasn't in the driveway. It was probably still in a tow yard, but Evan's rental car was there. The lights inside were off. He was waiting. He knew I would come back. Not for the house, but to finish it. Men like us, we don't leave loose ends. I circled to the back. The plywood on the basement window was still there. I bypassed it and went to the main power box on the side of the garage. I popped the panel and yanked the main breaker. The hum of the refrigerator inside died. The house went pitch black. I slipped on the night vision monocular. The world turned into shades of green and grain. I picked the lock on the back door again. It was almost too easy. I stepped into the kitchen. Silence. I moved through the living room, clearing corners. I checked the master bedroom. Empty. The bed was made. He wasn't sleeping. I moved toward the basement door. It was open. A trap. I smiled in the darkness. He wanted me to go down there. He wanted to play the game on his turf. I didn't go down the stairs. I went to the hall closet and grabbed a heavy winter coat. I tossed it down the stairs. Thump. Slide. Bang. A gunshot rang out from the darkness below. A muzzle flash lit up the stairwell for a split second. He was down there, aiming up. You missed, Evan, I shouted, moving my position immediately. Come down and face me. His voice echoed up, distorted by rage. Come get your house back. I don't want the house, I said, moving to the kitchen. I just want you. I grabbed a bottle of cooking oil from the pantry. I squeezed the bottle, spraying a slick trail across the top of the stairs and the kitchen floor. Then I waited. Coward, he screamed. I have your wife down here. You want to save her? He was bluffing. Tessa was probably at her sister's or halfway to Vegas. He was desperate. I didn't respond. Silence is a weapon. It makes the enemy think. It makes them sweat. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. I heard a creak on the stairs. He was coming up. He couldn't stand the waiting. I pressed myself against the refrigerator, holding my breath. The beam of a flashlight cut through the dark kitchen. He was sweeping the room. He stepped off the top stair onto the tile. His foot hit the oil. His legs went out from under him. He flailed, the flashlight spinning away, the gun clattering across the floor. He hit the ground hard, the wind knocked out of him. I stepped out of the shadows. I didn't shoot him. I didn't need to. I kicked him in the ribs. Hard. I heard a crack. He gasped, curling into a ball. I knelt on his chest, pressing the barrel of the suppressed .22 against his forehead. Game over, I whispered. He stared up at me, his eyes wide in the green glow of my night vision. He tried to speak, but only a wheeze came out. Please. He choked. Get up, I said, grabbing him by the collar of my robe. He was still wearing my damn robe. We're going downstairs. No. He whimpered, trying to dig his heels in. Not down there. Please. You liked it down there when it was my daughter, I said, dragging him across the floor. You said it was for discipline. You said it was a safe room. I shoved him toward the open door. He tumbled down the stairs, hitting the bottom with a groan. I followed him down, step by step. I flipped the breaker on the wall panel at the bottom of the stairs. The single bulb flickered to life. The basement looked exactly the same. The mattress, the bucket, the chain attached to the furnace. Welcome home, Evan, I said. I picked up the heavy iron chain. He scrambled backward, crab walking until he hit the wall. You can't do this. I'll give you money. I have money. I'll give you everything. I don't want your money, I said, clicking the shackle around his ankle. It was tight. He was bigger than Violet. It cut into his skin. I tossed the key into the dark corner of the room, behind a stack of old paint cans. You have a choice, I said, standing over him. You can confess. You can write it all down. The insurance fraud. The murder in Florida. Everything. If you do, I call the cops, and you go to prison for the rest of your life. And if I don't, he challenged, a spark of his old arrogance returning now that he wasn't being beaten. You won't kill me. You're a hero, remember? Delta Force. You don't execute civilians. I looked at the floor. In the corner, near the foundation, there was a square cut into the concrete. A hole about 3 feet deep. He had dug it to install a floor safe for his cash. I pointed to it. I'm not going to execute you, I said calmly. But I'm not leaving this house until that hole is filled. I walked over to the stack of bags Evan had bought for the renovation. Quick dry concrete. I dragged a bag over to the hole. Evan's face went white. You're bluffing, he whispered. I ripped the bag open. Dust puffed into the air. Start writing, I said. Evan didn't write. He laughed. It was a shaky, terrified sound, but it was laughter. He sat there, chained to the furnace, watching me pour the gray powder into the hole. You don't have the guts, he sneered. You think you can just bury me here? In the suburbs? The neighbors will hear. The cops will come looking for me. I'm a citizen. I have rights. I ignored him. I went to the utility sink and filled a bucket with water. I carried it back to the hole and poured it in. The dust swirled, turning into a thick, gray sludge. I grabbed a shovel and started mixing. Scrape. Slosh. Scrape. The sound was rhythmic, hypnotic. Mason, he shouted, rattling the chain. Stop it. This is insanity. You're going to rot in prison. Tessa knows I'm here. She'll tell them. I stopped mixing and looked at him. Tessa isn't telling anyone anything. She's terrified of the loan sharks you paid off. She's terrified of the fraud charges. She's gone, Evan. She took the first bus out of town. I saw the ticket purchase on the joint account before I cut the power. It was a lie, but a calculated one. Evan's face fell. His safety net was gone. I have money, he tried again, his voice trembling. In the Cayman Islands. 2 million. It's yours. Just let me go. I'll disappear. You'll never see me again. I don't want your blood money, I said, going back to the mix. It was getting thick now. Heavy. Why do you care so much? He screamed, pulling at the chain until his ankle bled. She's not even yours. Did Tessa tell you that? Violet isn't yours. She was pregnant when you met her. I froze. I looked at him. He was desperate, throwing out every lie he could think of to hurt me, to make me stop. She's my daughter, I said quietly. Biology doesn't make a father. Love does. Sacrifice does. You wouldn't understand that. You think kids are just paychecks. I picked up the shovel. I walked over to him. He scrambled back, cowering against the furnace. What are you doing? I'm giving you one last chance, I said. Confess. On video. Right now. I pulled out my phone. Go to hell, he spat. You won't do it. You're a soldier. You follow rules. I did follow rules, I said. For 20 years. I followed orders. I protected people who didn't know I existed. And I came home to find a monster in my house, torturing my child. I put the phone away. The rules don't apply down here, I said. I grabbed him by the collar and dragged him toward the hole. He fought. He kicked and clawed, but he was a con man, not a fighter. I threw him toward the edge. Look at it, I commanded. He looked down into the wet concrete. It was about 6 inches deep at the bottom, just a base layer. I'm not burying you yet, I said. I'm just setting the foundation. I shoved his legs into the hole. He screamed as his feet sank into the cold, wet mix. The chain was long enough to let him stand in it, but short enough that he couldn't climb out. It sets in 30 minutes, I said, checking my watch. Fast drying. Once it hardens, you're part of the house, Evan. You're part of the architecture. No. Please. He tried to pull his legs out, but the mix was thick, creating suction. He slipped and fell back into it, coating his robe in gray sludge. I'll talk, he shrieked. I'll tell you everything. Florida. The boy. The insurance. I did it. I did it all. Too late, I said, walking back to the bags of concrete. I grabbed another one. You wanted a confession? He cried, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the dirt and blood. I just gave it to you. Let me out. I ripped the second bag open. I don't need a confession for the police, I said, pouring the dry powder over his legs. He coughed, choking on the dust. The police aren't coming. I went for the water bucket again. What are you doing? He wailed. You said you weren't going to kill me. I'm not, I said, pouring the water. I'm just making sure you never hurt another child again. I started mixing the second layer around his knees. He realized then that I wasn't bluffing. I wasn't negotiating. I was pouring. He started to scream. A high, primal sound of pure terror. I didn't stop. I mixed. I poured. I mixed. I poured. By the time I was on the 5th bag, the concrete was at his waist. He had stopped screaming. He was shivering, in shock, muttering to himself. Please, he whispered. I can't breathe. Save your breath, I said. You have a long night ahead of you. I wasn't burying him alive. That would be murder. I was trapping him. I was creating a living statue. But as I reached for the 6th bag, I stopped. A noise upstairs. Footsteps. Heavy boots. Not police. Police announced themselves. These were tactical. Quiet. Controlled. Someone was in the house. I looked at the ceiling. I looked at Evan, who was half conscious in the concrete. Looks like your friends found us, I whispered. I grabbed the suppressed .22 and killed the light. The basement plunged into darkness. The darkness was absolute, save for the green glow of my monocular. Evan whimpered in the corner, the sound echoing softly against the concrete walls. Shut up, I hissed, moving away from the light switch, putting a steel support beam between me and the stairs. The footsteps above stopped. They were right over the kitchen, right over the open basement door. Whoever it was, they were good. No creaking floorboards. No heavy breathing. Just a predator pausing to listen. Then, a voice floated down. Calm. Deep. Mason. I froze. I knew that voice. It was Grant, my team leader from the unit. The man who had trained me. The man who had supposedly written me off as MIA. I know you're down there, Grant said. I saw the truck. Ryder called me. Ryder. That son of a bitch. I'm armed, Grant. I called out, keeping my aim steady on the doorway. Don't come down. I'm not here to arrest you, Grant said. I'm here to clean up the mess before the locals get involved. Ryder told me about the girl. About the chains. A pause. Is he alive? Grant asked. I looked at Evan. He was buried to his waist in wet concrete, shivering, his eyes rolling back in his head. Technically, I said. Good, Grant said. Keep it that way for 5 more minutes. I'm coming down. Weapon safe. I saw his silhouette appear at the top of the stairs. He held his hands out, showing me empty palms. He walked down slowly, his eyes adjusting to the gloom. He didn't flinch when he saw me pointing the pistol at his chest. He reached the bottom and looked around. He saw the chains, the bucket, the bleach. His jaw tightened. Then he looked at Evan. Jesus, Grant muttered. You really committed to the bit, didn't you? He tortured my daughter, Grant, for 8 days. He was going to kill her for insurance money. Grant walked over to the hole. He looked down at Evan, who was mumbling incoherently about money and lawyers. Grant kicked the wet concrete. It was starting to harden. You can't leave him like this, Mason, Grant said. Watch me. No, Grant said, turning to face me. I mean, you can't leave him half done. If the cops find him like this, you go away for life. Torture, kidnapping, attempted murder. I lowered the gun slightly. So what do you suggest? Grant reached into his jacket. I tensed, but he didn't pull a gun. He pulled out a pair of leather gloves and put them on. Ryder told me what this guy is, Grant said. A fixer, a ghost. He killed a kid in Florida. The system let him walk because he knows how to play the game. Grant walked over to the stack of concrete bags. He grabbed one and threw it to me. The system is broken, Mason, Grant said, grabbing a shovel. Sometimes you have to fix it yourself. I stared at him. You're helping me? You're my brother, Grant said. And nobody hurts our kids. Nobody. He looked at Evan. Does he have family? Anyone who will look for him? No, I said. He's a grifter. He burns bridges. Good, Grant said. Then let's finish the floor. We worked in silence. Bag after bag. Mixing. Pouring. Evan woke up as the concrete reached his chest. He started screaming again. No. Grant. Officer. Please. He's crazy. Grant didn't even look at him. He just kept shoveling. When the concrete reached his chin, Evan started to hyperventilate. You're killing me, he gasped. You're burying me alive. We're not burying you, Grant said coldly. We're just closing the hole. Grant looked at me. Do it. I grabbed the roll of duct tape from my bag. I taped Evan's mouth shut. His eyes bulged, wide with horror. We poured the last few bags. We didn't cover his head. We stopped right at his neck. The concrete was level with the basement floor. Only Evan's head remained, sticking out of the gray slab like a grotesque trophy. He was breathing through his nose, frantic, terrified breaths. Now what? I asked, wiping sweat from my forehead. Grant walked over to the corner where the old construction supplies were. He picked up a large, plastic storage bin, a heavy-duty one. He flipped it over and placed it over Evan's head. Soundproof, Grant said. Air holes in the top. Then, he pointed to the corner. We built the false floor. We spent the next 3 hours working. We built a wooden subfloor over the concrete, raising the level of the room by 6 inches. We laid new plywood. We laid the carpet back down. When we were done, the basement looked exactly as it had before. Flat, empty, quiet. But underneath, in the dark, Evan was still there. Alive, trapped in a stone suit that would never let him go. He'll starve, I said, looking at the carpet. He has air, Grant said, packing up the tools. He has time to think about what he did. And when he stops thinking, Grant shrugged. The house settles. Grant walked to the stairs. Let's go. We have a flight to catch. You and Violet need to disappear before the sun comes up. I looked back one last time. I couldn't see him. I couldn't hear him. But I knew he was there. The monster under the floor. I turned off the light. 6 months later. The ocean breeze was warm, carrying the scent of salt and freedom. I sat on the porch of a small beach house in Costa Rica, watching Violet run through the surf. Her limp was gone. Her laugh, which had been stolen for so long, had returned. It was the most beautiful sound in the world. She wasn't Violet Davis anymore. We had new names, new passports, a new life. I took a sip of my coffee and opened the laptop on the table. I logged into a secure server using a VPN that bounced my signal through 3 different continents. I had one notification, an email from Grant. Subject, closed case. I opened it. Attached was a scanned document from the Ohio State Police. Missing person report, Evan Davis. Status, inactive/cold case. Notes, subject is believed to have fled the country due to massive gambling debts and pending fraud investigation. No leads. Case suspended. I smiled. They had bought the story. Tessa had disappeared into the wind, too scared of her own shadow to ever talk. And Evan? Well, Evan was exactly where he was always meant to be, part of the foundation. But there was a second attachment. A letter. It wasn't from Grant. It was a handwritten note on judicial letterhead. To Mason, I know what you did. I know you didn't leave the country immediately that night. I know you went back to the house. My heart skipped a beat. I scrolled down to the signature. Judge Felix Sterling. The judge who had signed the restraining order against me. The judge who had given Evan custody. I kept reading. I signed that order because I had to follow the law. But the law is blind, Mason. It doesn't see evil. It only sees paperwork. 3 years ago, my granddaughter was dating a man named Colin Miller in Florida. She died in a boating accident. The man walked away with $1 million in insurance money. We could never prove it was him. But when I saw Evan Davis in my courtroom, I recognized him. I recognized the eyes. I couldn't stop him legally, but I knew you wouldn't let him walk. That's why I delayed the police response time that night. That's why the security cameras on your street malfunctioned for 3 hours. Justice isn't always a gavel, Mason. Sometimes it's a shovel. Enjoy your life. You saved your daughter. And you avenged mine. Felix. I closed the laptop. The wind rustled the palm trees. I looked out at Violet. She was building a sandcastle near the water's edge. She was digging a moat, piling the wet sand high to protect her fortress. Daddy, she yelled, waving at me. Come help me build the wall. I stood up. I walked down the wooden steps, my bare feet sinking into the warm sand. I walked toward my daughter, leaving the ghost of Evan Davis thousands of miles behind, buried in the cold dark of a life he deserved. He had tried to bury us. He had tried to bury the truth. But in the end, he only dug his own grave. Wow, that was a heavy one. I have a question for you all. If you were in Mason's shoes, if the law failed you and a monster had your child, would you have walked away? Or would you have poured that concrete yourself? Be honest. Let me know in the comments below. And while you're there, tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. It helps more than you know. And if you want to be part of our family, subscribe and turn on notifications. I want to write stories that you want to hear. So tell me, what kind of stories do you want next? More military revenge? Cheating wife thrillers? Or maybe a dark mystery with a supernatural twist? Let me know in the comments, and I'll bring those nightmares to life for you. Until the next epic revenge, stay safe and watch your six.